Tonight we're in Yeovil, and welcome to Question Time. And we're actually not precisely in Yeovil. We're in the Fleet Air Arm Museum at Yeovilton, which is just outside Yeovil. On our panel tonight, the former Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, who was a member of the European Parliament, then voted for Brexit, and is the Conservative MP Theresa Villiers. David Lammy, Labour MP for the same London constituency for 18 years, a minister in both the Blair and the Brown governments. The managing director of the frozen food company Iceland, which recently became the first big retailer in Britain to pledge to get rid of plastic packaging within 5 years, Richard Walker. And the economist, writer, campaigner, who used to work for the charity Save the Children, Faiza Shaheen. And the former Sunday Times journalist who became David Cameron's head of policy, now in the House of Lords, Camilla Cavendish. Thank you very much. Let's have our first question, which comes from Victoria McGregor.
Would you still make a donation to Oxfam?
Would you still make a donation to Oxfam? David Lammy.
Yes, just about. And that's because there is so much to do across the world, and Oxfam and a number of aid agencies have been leading the way. There are 130 million young girls across the world who are not being educated. In our own country, we're pledged to get 11 million of those young girls educated by 2020. I think of Ebola and diseases across the world like malaria, which we could overcome, and the wonderful work that taxpayers in this country have contributed to. So I know that there is a debate about getting rid of aid entirely. It's not one I agree with. Having said that, this is a moment for the aid agencies to step up and understand why the public are so upset. The old-fashioned idea, it seems to me, of someone flying in from Holland on this occasion to Haiti, gap year kids working and sort of doing good to the poor, has got to end. I've been critical of the way in which Africa and development and aid is sometimes portrayed as if immigrants from those countries don't give 3 times more, actually, send back in remittances than the aid agencies or taxpayers. So there's a lot that's got to change, and this is a moment in which I hope that happens. But I'd also say this one point, that in the end, we in this country and other Western countries also have to remember the role we played in the carve-up of the African continent, the Indian continent, our imperialist and colonialist past. That means whilst we need reform in aid, it would be absolutely objectionable for this country to withdraw from its international obligations to the very poorest in the world.
Of course, the question arises from the 2011 cover-up, as Oxfam was accused of their staff in Haiti using prostitutes. Faiza Shaheen, what do you think?
That what we've heard over the last week is incredibly disappointing. I hear it when people say that I'm not sure if I should give money anymore. The thing is, of course, and it's absolutely right that those in senior positions and those involved should consider their positions. But the big thing is, of course, is that despicable people cannot stop good people from doing good work and doing good deeds. This is humanitarian work. We are humans. We need to retain that. We need to fight for that. I totally agree that the development agencies need to do a lot more. And look, for the last few months, we've heard a lot about the abuse of power. We've heard about it in Hollywood. We've heard about it in Parliament. And we've heard about it in sports. And this is just another place where that societal problem is clear. That when you give people too much power, they can abuse that. Not always, of course, but they can abuse that. So we need to do a lot more on the safeguards. And we need to do a lot more to make sure that some of what happened in terms of, not being known that this guy was managed to get another job afterwards, that can't happen again. And that's the sort of thing we need to make sure they do now. So what I would say to you is if Oxfam and other development agencies can't show that they are making that difference, they are shifting their funds and shifting the way that they are doing things, then that's the point at which you say, OK, look, they haven't changed
Can I just
their ways.
put to you a quotation from the Oxfam Staff Training Manual and ask you whether you think this is a proper or adequate answer to this? It was written in 2006, and it says, "We haven't banned the use of prostitutes, but we strongly discourage it." Is that enough?
No, I mean, I don't think that's enough.
What do you think they should be saying?
Well, look, it just shouldn't have happened. They shouldn't be using prostitutes. Look, I worked for Save the Children for just 18 months, and the issues that are coming out here of quite macho environments are things that, of course, are there in this sector, and I saw them. And there was a bigger issue, and I completely support the use of foreign aid, and we need to think about... I was there when the Ebola outbreak happened, and you think about people that go there and help people. I mean, they're heroes often, and we often find that if we hadn't have made those interventions at that time, can you imagine what would have happened if that disease had spread further? So it's really worth that investment.
All right.
But there's a lot of change that does need to happen within the development sector, and this is the time to do it.
All right. The person there in blue who just had their hand up. Yes.
I'm a charity worker myself, and whilst there's always going to be bad apples in any organisation, and safeguarding is about minimising the risk, isn't this a society issue? Why are we starting to... I know there's an issue with Oxfam, and we can start cherry picking, but this is an issue with all of our societies.
OK. And the person at the hand, keep your hands up if you want to speak. Yes, you.
Yeah, I work with a couple of West Country charities that have been through a difficult period recently. And one of the problems is that the Charity Commission is a toothless regulator. And what Oxfam shows is that it's a toothless regulator because it looked at this problem a while ago and moved away without finding the real issue.
And it didn't sort of dig to find out what was going on?
And it doesn't. And if we're not dealing with... If the Charity Commission is not focused on preventing financing foreign terrorism, which is what the government have tasked it to look at, it ignores virtually everything else until it hits the papers.
All right. Richard Walker.
I mean, look, what happened was beyond reprehensible to exploit the most vulnerable in some of the most vulnerable areas in the world. And I hope it serves as a wake-up call for the sector. And now the spotlight is on. I'm sure more will come out. But from any organisation's point of view, in business or in the charitable sector, you need to ensure that positions of power are not abused, and that people who have been abused can be facilitated to come forward and speak up. So I would argue that Oxfam urgently need to step up and show leadership, because I'm really worried about the future of this amazing organisation, which is being poisoned by a few people.
Would you still make a donation, as the questioner said? You would?
Yes, I would, because to not make that donation is almost to doubly hurt those people that need our help the most.
All right. Camilla Cavendish.
So I don't think this is a debate or should be a debate about shutting down aid. I think this is a debate about accountability. And I agree, we can't just single out Oxfam. There are clearly issues, unfortunately, that are emerging across the board. But the truth is that I think if I was running Oxfam, and I was an aid worker a long time ago, and I know how chaotic it is, I know there are great people working on the front line, and I know how these things, I can imagine how these things can go wrong. If I'd been running Oxfam, I would have shut down that operation in Haiti. I would have fired that guy rather than paying him off so he could get a job somewhere else, and I would have put my hand up. That wouldn't have shut down the help to Haiti. All that would have meant was that other agencies who are already there would have moved in. But the truth is that I am very uncomfortable with a big organisation covering things up, passing on monstrous employees with appalling behaviour, and something has gone wrong in that organisation, I'm sorry to say. And I think this is a deep issue of accountability. I have not actually donated to Oxfam myself for years. I donate to Médecins Sans Frontières and smaller charities where I feel I really know the money's going to the front line, but that's a sort of personal decision. But I don't think it's okay for institutions to say that because their mission is to help the vulnerable, they are not accountable. That to me is wrong. And we need to do something about it.
The Speaker at the back said that the Charities Commission wasn't doing its job either because it didn't pick up on this and didn't investigate it properly, and they are the watchdog, as he was saying.
Well, I think that's a very interesting issue, and I mean, I know some of the work of the Charities Commission, which actually has been very effective. I think you're talking about terrorism and that aspect. Maybe they have focused on that more. I think regulators always have a difficult job. I'm sure more should be done. But you know what? Oxfam shouldn't have let this happen in the first place.
Okay.
That's kind of...
Teresa Villas.
I mean, it is repellent that people who were there to help vulnerable people ended up exploiting them. So I think for the moment, when making a donation, I prefer to give to a different aid charity than Oxfam until Oxfam can prove that it's cleaned up its act. But I agree with the speaker at the back who said, unfortunately, people who abuse power are present in all sectors of society. The crucial thing now is for the aid sector as a whole to make sure that they have the most robust possible safeguarding mechanisms so that whistleblowers can come forward, so victims can come forward, and so this type of abuse is detected at an early stage and stopped in its tracks. But I'm convinced that we should continue as individuals and as taxpayers to donate to development aid. It is crucial not only just for the moral reasons of helping some of the poorest and most disadvantaged in the world, but it is also crucial, I think, for our interests as a nation. And I take as an example the fact that UK taxpayers' aid has supported almost 65 million people to have access to clean water and healthcare. Now, that kind of project is essential in tackling antimicrobial resistance.
And you support the 0.7% of GDP going to aid, do you?
I do,
which many people criticise on the grounds that it's a lot of money and could be used elsewhere. Unequivocal support you have for it.
I support the 0.7% target. It is a lot of money, but there is a moral case to do this. But there are also very sensible, practical reasons why it is in the interest of the United Kingdom to spend this money.
You agree?
I don't support the 0.7% target, not because I don't think that aid is important or because I don't think we have done some great things as a country, but because when you set a target like that and you set it in stone, it becomes an enormous incentive for people to spend money without thinking it through. And that's why I have never actually supported that target. And many years ago, I started writing about Ethiopia, which is a huge recipient of British aid, where the government was using aid to silence dissidents. And I wrote with the help of Human Rights Watch, and I couldn't get the government to talk to me, and I couldn't get the agencies to talk to me because they had too much vested, and they had essentially, you know, too much vested interest in continuing that flow of money.
Did you say all this to David Cameron when you were working for him in the policy unit?
I have over many years said that to him. Actually.
And he takes no notice, or he took no notice.
Believes, I'm sure still, and did then absolutely passionately in aid. He believes in helping the most vulnerable. That's great. What I object to, and what I worry about is when you set a target in stone, you create a strange set of incentives.
You say.
I run a charity. The Charities Commission's been given dozens of new powers by the government to investigate charities. It just isn't using them because it doesn't have the resources to do so. Why has it taken a national scandal for them finally to investigate Oxfam?
And your answer to that is that they don't have...
They're short of resources.
And the woman there on the left.
Andrew Mitchell was the Secretary of State when this scandal took place, and he said that the reason he didn't know about it is because Oxfam described it as misconduct, and the officials that differed took it no further. So surely there's culpability there. If something came through my desk that said misconduct, my first question would be, what kind of misconduct? They didn't ask the question.
Right. He was a minister in your party's government. What do you say?
Oxfam should have described the type of misconduct that it was.
No, but she says if you get a thing on your paper saying misconduct, you investigate. You don't just say, oh, misconduct, right?
Well, I mean, certainly in hindsight, they should have asked more questions, but the real culpability here is with Oxfam for not disclosing the nature of what happened.
Any more points for anyone? Otherwise, I'll go on to the next question. Yes, you, sir.
Will all these people that's been caught now be blacklisted and stopped from working within charities in the future?
David Lammy?
God, I hope so. I mean, look, I think the point is about power. De facto, if you are coming from Britain to any of these countries, you have considerable power. You land in those countries, you see the jeeps that people go around in, the salaries they get are significantly higher than local people. What we've got to do is we've got to bend towards the south. You need local workers, local community. You've got to lift them up. Far, far more than sort of Westerners arriving. So, of course, they've got to be sacked. And let me just say, Oxfam have got to move rapidly to show that they have heard. I think there've got to be more people looking at their positions and stepping aside. Fresh people have got to arrive. They've got to be southern-based, connected to the ground, to really demonstrate that they've got it. And lots of other agencies have got to follow that as well. When taxpayers are funding Oxfam, 32 million, it does require greater scrutiny. And that's why it is right that ministers are asking questions about what that misconduct was and that the Charity Commission isn't just a toothless regulator. Absolutely.
OK. Right, just before Will has ever give them at the end, but I'll take this question now, please, from Ruth Binney. Ruth Binney, please.
If biscuits and other highly processed foods are damaging the nation's health, isn't it time for them to be taxed?
Yes, this is based, I think, on this report today, isn't it? The French government saying people who use highly processed foods are more likely to get cancer. Well, Iceland. Highly processed foods and biscuits.
I picked a good week to come on.
You did? 75 chicken nuggets for £3.
Well, actually...
no, when you answer the question,
Can
anyway,
I pick you? Something that's been annoying me about
Yes.
the press today is the chicken nugget. It's been used as an example of an ultra-processed food. Our chicken nuggets are made from 100% chicken and breadcrumbs. And there is an important point here.
What did you say your company was called?
What is wrong with that, other than snobbery?
All right, OK. Shall I go down the rest of the list or not? No. 24 cans of Pepsi for £6.50, 42 packets. I don't know why this matters, because you're here to answer the general question. If, and you know the business well, highly processed foods are damaging the health, is it time for them actually to be taxed?
Look, I think ultimately it comes down to a balanced diet. And I recognise that retailers have a responsibility to provide an option of choices. So if you want to have a processed meal, retailers need to ensure that that is high quality, to the best possible standards at the best possible price. If you want to do some scratch cooking and buy chicken and vegetables and fresh food, which you can do from our store, we're not all frozen, then you know that's fine as well. So I think it's incumbent on the retailers to give customers that choice. I don't think that we can really tax our way to solving this situation. But I think we can all do better. There are regulations that have come in, for example, such as on sugar. And don't tell anyone, because I'm hoping our customers won't notice, but we've taken out over the last year 10% sugar.
But do you accept in principle that highly processed foods are less good for you than fresh food? And this report by the French doctors saying you're more likely to get cancer, are you disturbed by that, or do you reject that argument?
I'm not disturbed by it, and I think the researchers themselves have said that more research needs to be done. But every week there's a food scare, and it may be excessive alcohol consumption, or excessive fat, or excessive sugar. And of course, if you eat one thing always, it will be bad for you. The fundamental point here is it's about balance and choice. And, you know, retailers have got to work damn hard to make sure that our products are as good a quality as we can make them.
Camilla Cavendish.
Well, I was the author of the sugar tax on fizzy drinks, which is coming in next year. So I'm regarded as a health fascist and deeply unpopular with many sections of the community.
Are you unpopular with Iceland?
Well, I don't know, because by the sound of it,
You can buy quinoa, asparagus spears, you know, not what you think.
Correct. Great. I live on asparagus spears, that's all I know.
All right, come on, back to the sugar.
So, look, what I discovered... So, you know, the evidence on fizzy drinks is terrible. Teenagers in this country drink an enormous amount of it. Richard's point about moderation is right, but the fact is we don't seem very good in ourselves at being moderate. We wanted to bring in a tax to make those drinks more expensive. There was an onslaught from the companies. Every company said they couldn't possibly reformulate, it would be impossible to change their ingredients, it would be impossible to take the sugar out. Here we are, 3 months before the tax comes in, and every single company except one has already reformulated its drink to avoid the tax, which I think is a huge success. And I do actually think, sadly, I would much rather work with business to do these things, but sometimes you really need to put pressure on, because it is very difficult for consumers to know what on earth we're supposed to buy.
But
and making things more expensive does change people's behaviour in a way that I'm afraid all the leaflets we've all read over the years and all the newspaper articles fundamentally don't.
You talk about sugar, but do you think all processed foods... I mean, they're saying today that the longer the list of things that make up the food, the more likely it is to be highly processed. Do you think they should be
Well, this
taxed?
is what I've read. I think it's very difficult, having done this sugar tax, which is relatively easy to tax sugar in a drink because it's quite easy to isolate the sugar. I think it would be incredibly difficult to tax individual ingredients, which is actually why the government is trying to work with businesses like Richard's to do something slightly more sophisticated.
But there's obviously an issue about the way in which corporations and food businesses behave when they are given these regulations, and there's obviously more we can do on that front. There's obviously the other side of this equation, which is people's pockets. Part of the reason that they will go to Iceland and go to certain stores is because they're cheaper, and they'll buy things that perhaps are more processed and are you know, a pound for chicken nuggets or whatever it is, which my husband quite likes actually. You know, is the way in which people make their money work. And we've had a decade of such low wage growth in this country. I mean, we haven't had a decade of this type of wage growth for over 200 years. People are really feeling the squeeze in terms of how much money they have left over. And there are also time restraints as well, right? So people are working more hours, trying to make those ends meet. And that's where, you know, these sorts of shortcuts and these kinds of foods become a possibility in which to just make it work, make every day work. So we don't want to punish those people. We want to do something on both sides of those equations. We want to give people more money, make sure they have jobs that pay them well, and we want to make sure that they can buy good produce. You know, there's some places you live and there's like food deserts. It's like hard to get good fresh produce in your neighbourhood. So we need to do something on both sides.
Ruth Binney, you asked the question, what do you think?
I'm particularly concerned about what I would call the food extras, the biscuits, the crisps, the things that aren't really nutritionally valuable. But I would also go further. If I was going to have a tax on them, I would actually ring-fence that tax money for the NHS.
All right. So, well, I'll come to you, but who else would like to talk? You all obviously go shopping. Yes, the woman there in the centre. What do you think? Would you like to see a tax on processed foods?
Well, I hate to use a pun, but it sounds like all stick and no carrot here. Instead of making processed food more expensive, why not make healthy food cheaper? Because it's actually really expensive to go shopping and to buy all of those healthy ingredients, the gentleman said, to make your food from scratch. It adds up. Ask Jamie Oliver. He says he's got those cheap books, but my God, it adds up. It's very expensive to cook from scratch.
How do you find yourself buying then? Do you buy a lot of processed food?
We try. We do try. I've got 2 children, so we try to eat healthily and we try to cook from scratch as much as possible. But as Faiza said, my husband and I work full-time. I'm a teacher. My husband's in the Navy. It's not always possible to go to the supermarket, gather up all those ingredients, pay for it all at once. It's actually really expensive to make one meal as opposed to grabbing, I don't know, just a quick takeaway meal or something like that.
The man in blue there, do you agree with her?
On making fresh foods cheaper, you can go into Asda and they've got things like raspberries, they're £2 a punnet or 2 for £3. Why can't they just make 1 punnet for £1.50? Because things go off really quick.
But the volume is too big for single... yes. Well, I don't think we want to get into a retail argument necessarily.
Why not?
Teresa Villas.
Well, the trouble with taxes on food is the people they hit in the pocket are the people on the lowest income. So I'm not convinced that we should take this step. I do, though, believe it is vital for the food industry to do more to reduce sugar content. I'm somewhat sceptical about this particular study. It seems that they only got people to write out what they ate for 2 days. It seems quite a big step then to draw the conclusions that they have. But there is no doubt that being overweight is one of the most important preventable causes of cancer. So both the food industry and, you know, government and society as a whole, we need a strong public health campaign to educate people and support them in trying to eat more healthily, because that is the best way to prevent themselves from getting cancer.
OK. And the person up there on the gangway, yes.
Me?
Yes, you.
Yeah, why do we always come back to this thing about if you put prices of these processed and sugary goods up, it's always the lowest paid people that will suffer? Why does anybody need to give their children cans of Coke? Exactly. You're not going to die if you don't have a can of Coke. There's water, there's much less fizzy, sweet drinks about, and cheaper.
Yeah.
OK. And the one there.
Yes. Perhaps we should look at the cause and go back to the syllabus of home economics at school and teach children how to cook properly from scratch. Yeah. We used to do it when I went to school, and now they have to put a topping on a pizza that they bought in a shop.
Yeah.
David Lammy. Thank you.
I think we've really got to keep in mind when we're talking about taxes, families where both couples are working and finishing work at 5, 6 o'clock in the evening.
Like her family.
We've got to keep in mind single mums. We've got to keep in mind those on 0-hour contracts. And so the fact is that processed food is a way of life. So it seems to me the starting point is the regulation. Don't underestimate the power, of big supermarkets in this country. Don't underestimate how governments can defer often. The debates around labelling. Too much fat, too much sugar, too much salt in a lot of this food. So you've got to get the regulation first before you start to tax people because of the circumstances in which they live, it seems to me.
Do you feel unregulated?
No, look,
I mean, is he right saying you have the power and not the government?
I'm broadly in favour, you know, of regulation coming in, so long as it's a level playing field and the industry can act together. You know, and I think the lady over there made a really valid point on home economics and education. That must play a role as well. You know,
why do we always blame the schools?
No,
for what in the end is a supermarket's problem?
And listen, you know,
leave the teachers out of it.
Let us not demonise a ready meal, because if it's good quality and you know you don't have much time, then what is the problem?
Can I explain one thing?
I'll come to you.
The sugar tax on drinks, it was not a tax on customers, it's a tax on manufacturers. And the whole point of it was to get manufacturers to change the ingredients in the product.
So they've cut down the amount of sugars.
That's what.
So nobody's paying this tax, you're saying?
If you can actually get manufacturers to stop putting junk because it's cheaper for them into their products.
But Coca-Cola, as a result of this, are reducing the amount of Coke and putting the price up.
Coca-Cola are not Coca-Cola, the one company that is not changing their product, as I understand.
And they're putting the price up.
I don't know what they're doing with the price, but
they
may put the price up, but you will have other options which will be cheaper.
All right, the one here.
When I went to postnatal classes just after having my babies, a lot of the other mothers there were saying that their children wouldn't drink water, they would only drink squash, and they would only eat biscuits and they wouldn't eat vegetables. And in my view, the point about education is really important, but actually I think it's educating parents, because once you've got a child, even at 5 or 6, and they've been brought up eating biscuits and cakes and not eating vegetables and not understanding about that side of things, it's almost too late. So I'm not convinced particularly about the tax, although I like the idea of it being preventative. But I think the really, really important thing is to make sure that we have good education of parents and parenting.
OK. The man up there, yes, you, sir.
You need to make the distinction between pre-prepared food and processed food, which has got blurred there. You can buy from Iceland pre-prepared food that isn't processed, just needs heating, and then processed foods like sausages, burgers, things like that.
And food that just needs eating sounds
Sorry,
Right,
heating.
right. Oh, heating. I think it's
It's a marketing campaign.
this food just needs eating. Yes, the woman there, the right.
I just wanted to say the thing about schools is just too easy. I've got 2 kids at high school. They've made chicken nuggets from scratch. They've made vegetable korma from scratch. They bring them home and they're delicious. So it is happening in schools.
Okay. Let's move on to another question. Since we're talking about schools, I'll bring you in on it if you'd like to come in on it. Okay, it's a question from Michelle. Is Mordu the right pronunciation?
Mordu. Can the ticking time bomb of mental health and stress in our schools really be solved by even more testing?
And this is based on this announcement that schools, 8-, 9-year-olds, going to have tests of their tables added to the tables they already have.
But further from that, also the suggestion from Nick Gibb to bring testing further down to 12-year-olds because it would alleviate their exam stress further on in their educational career.
And obviously health and stress in schools is a really serious growing issue. Teresa Villas, what do you think?
Yeah, I do worry about the amount of testing there is in schools, but it is working. School standards are rising. Literacy standards are improving dramatically in our schools. We are seeing exam standards rising as well. And I believe that whilst, I think it's important to keep these things under review, I think we should think very carefully before introducing new tests. But, for example, with the latest announcements on times tables, these are the sorts of tests that have been used successfully elsewhere in the world. And I do believe that testing is helping to deliver very significant improvements in our education system.
Okay, Michelle...
Are the test scores rising, but actually the application of the skills are not rising? I think that's what I find as a deputy head teacher, as somebody who's working on the front line with education. They're not actually able then to apply those skills. They're not using those skills in the right frame, in the right way, when they go back or when they go out into the workforce.
And you asked a question about mental stress. You find that growing in your school?
Absolutely, without enough funding being put in place for those children to support them. We're effectively telling the children that they failed at such a young age, and actually that all that does is degrade them. We've already got several generations walking around having hated school. We mustn't create another generation of people that don't enjoy school. Well, surely it's our job to light the fires.
What form does the mental health and stress take, in your experience as a deputy head?
Well, you've got children who are fearful of going into an exam situation. They're fearful of it. They're worried about not passing. They're worried that all they're bothered about is what they get on the test score. And then it becomes not about acquiring skills for life. It becomes about a test score. So yes, actually, the phonics test did raise the standards. It raised the standards in passing a test, but it didn't actually impact on reading. And that's what it is. I'll cultivate a love of reading.
We are going up the international league tables on literacy and reading. It has
and
had
how
an
are we
effect.
doing on mental health?
Well, we need to do better on mental health, which is why the government is committed to a dramatic increase in funding for mental health care.
Would you accept that what is being described by Michelle is a price that has to be paid for improvement in the international table of excellence? Is stress a natural consequence of what's being imposed on children?
Of course we should be doing everything we can to prevent mental health issues in children, but it is possible to introduce new tests in schools without excessive stress on students, and it is very important to recognise the role of testing in ensuring that children are getting a decent education. That is crucial for them getting a good start.
The person behind Michelle there, yes, you.
I've been a teacher. I've also written exam specifications. I've been a teacher for 23 years. I now work in a charity with people who suffer with mental health issues. I understand that assessment is simply about statistics. It's simply about, so this country can say to another country, look how good our students are. This generation are disempowered. I have 3 children in their 20s. They can't remember their maths because it was something that was done to them. They weren't engaged in it at all. The vocational educations, the BTECs went out. That was an absolute disaster because BTECs were brilliant. They engaged the people, they taught them life skills, they gave them interpersonal skills, great communication skills, and now we're just back to a simple test, which is testing one form of intelligence in one way, which suits a certain group of people.
Camilla Cavendish.
Well, I have 3 children and the eldest is just about to do his GCSEs. And I think, you know, I've been around the policy world for a long time. It's not till you have kids that you see it for what it is. And what I can't believe is how little has changed since I was at school. And it seems to me that we test memory, we test short-term memory and being able to learn things by rote, and it is important to learn your times tables, but we still test those things when we're living in a world where short-term memory is no longer very important. And I do think your point is very interesting about the application of skills. We have gone up the league tables. But I worry, when I look at the GCSE courses, about the content of those courses and the number of keywords you have to just produce in order to get the tick in the box. And I think there is something missing. I wonder, actually, whether we should still be testing kids at 16 at all, given that everybody now stays till 18. And I worry that we are just creating, I mean, luckily, I think we have abolished AS levels, which means that at least you don't have yet another series of tests. But what we need are children who are really curious about the world. We need children who can actually apply their skills. And I have to say, I do believe in testing. I do think it's important. But I don't think we're catering for children with dyslexia, for children with a whole series of challenges who are not particularly good at short-term memory. But there are many other skills that we're going to need if Britain is going to compete in the world.
And what about the stress and mental health as a price that's paid for this testing regime?
Well, I think we are seeing an awful lot of that.
An increasing amount of that?
I do think the onus is partly on schools to, as much as possible, try and reduce the stress. I think some children at a very early age are picking up stress from their teachers and from the whole environment, and I think that is a major problem.
Okay. The woman up there on the gangway.
I've got 3 granddaughters, aged from 7 and up, and they love nothing more than to have a test. And I think when they're little and they're being given tests, they're fun, and like the lady said, it's the stress can come from the teachers, and if the teachers aren't stressed, the children aren't stressed. The SATs was explained as a special test, and it was something to be excited about.
Okay, and you sit in the front. There are a lot of people with their hands up. And just hear from... Yes. Yes, you.
So at my university, someone said their kids really enjoy testing, a majority don't. At my university in Southampton, there's a real emphasis being placed upon getting kids to engage in the school through actually learning through sport. So that actually, rather than sat down in the classroom learning their times tables, they're actually applying these skills through PE, physical education, which is actually being proved to work across Hampshire on a large scale. Okay. I think should be rolled out across more counties across the UK.
Faiza, do you think there's a rising problem of mental stress among children because of exams?
It's not a matter of thinking, it's a fact, isn't it? It's just there, and we need to listen more to teachers. And this is what's happened in the last, 8 years since we've had Conservative-led governments as well, that we have cut and cut and cut. Teachers themselves are under huge amounts of stress. You don't have teaching assistants anymore. It's just a lot more to do with the testing as well. And we need to listen to you about your own stresses as well as what's going on with the children and the kids in your class.
We already assess our children. I think it's frankly insulting to have to bring in a test to do a job that we're already capable of doing. Trust the professionals. We do know what we're doing.
And this is the thing, right? And we hear about mental health all of the time, from Theresa May talking about investment in mental health. When I go out and talk to youth services, when I talk to people working in mental health with young people, it's cut. The truth of the matter on the ground is very different to what we hear from government ministers.
Okay. Richard Walker, you must see lots of people coming out of the education system to work for you. What's your impression of the way that they're being taught and the pressures they're under?
Well, I'm no educational expert, but I am a dad to 2 young girls. And obviously I want them to be the best they can be and do whatever they want to do in life. But I'm already worried about the amount of homework they have and the amount of tests they have. My wife used to work in Norway, and I think kids start school their age 6 or 7. And it seems a lot more of a relaxed introduction. But to David's point, in terms of what we see, I think in terms of targets, a lot of school leavers think that maybe higher education, university is the only option available to them. But, you know, Skills for Life was a great phrase, because we need to be looking at a broad suite of options, from vocational training to the apprenticeship levy, which has come in, which is fantastic. So we sponsor school leavers, we pay them a graduate equivalent salary, but they're 18 and they can train with us.
OK, let's come back to the testing. The woman on the right there.
I think a lot of the mental stress is caused by the desire of parents or the children themselves to succeed. But I think a lesson in life is, if you fail, you then try again harder the next time. So I don't think these children should be under undue pressure the whole time. Being a failure is also a lesson in life.
And the woman there on the right, yes.
You said that your government was committed to providing more support for mental health in schools. I'm a teacher, and I'm wondering when that's going to come through, because as a tutor, I have students come to me with mental health issues pretty much every day, and there is no support that we can access as teachers. We're having to be counsellors as well as teachers.
So what do you do when somebody comes to you? Are you a teacher of young people, or...?
I teach A-levels at a college.
What do you do when people come to you?
I support them as best as I can, and I refer them to what services are available in our college, but more often than not, it can take weeks for them to get in with a counsellor, and when you're 16, that's too long. They need help then and there.
But do you attribute this to the testing in schools?
Oh yes, there's a huge amount of pressure put on young people to get the grades they need at A-level to get into university, and it's this constant, you need to do this to get to the next step, but
okay.
What's the end for them?
David Lammy.
Well, I think the question is, why have the government suddenly decided that we need another round of tests for 8-year-olds, that is the priority? I just don't think that's the priority. The priority, if we're going to exit the European Union, is skills. So bring back night schools in this country. The priority is invest in youth services in this country. The priority is, why have we cut FE budgets by 50%? Are any open in the evening so people can skill up? Those are the priorities. Not testing 8-year-olds. And yeah, it's so sad that we're walking down the road like the Americans. We're seeing more self-harm of youngsters, really young kids. Our teachers are stressed out and leaving the profession. And if you have a child with a mental health problem, or a learning disability, or one of those issues, you try getting a speech therapist. You tried ringing up child and adolescent mental health services. Impossible to get on the waiting list. You're waiting for years, basically, just to get seen. That's the context.
Yes.
Now, under Conservative-led governments, there's now 1.9 million more children studying in good or outstanding schools. We are seeing stronger exam standards, and also, for the very first time in the history of the NHS, we are introducing waiting time targets for mental health care. We are investing record amounts, more than ever before, in mental health care, with a strong focus on young people in schools. So we are focused on this problem, and I also want to emphasise that I agree very strongly. The apprenticeship levy is a revolutionary instrument of social justice and education. It's going to mean many million more young people getting a real effective start in life. So I just don't accept Pfizer's characterisation of schools under this government. There have been very significant improvements in our education.
What do you say to the point David Lammy was making about people who need psychological support and can't get it, people who need speech therapy and can't get it, the long delays that the teacher was talking about, everybody knows about before these young people get help?
Of course we want people to get help as quickly as possible.
Of course you want them to, but the question is, he's saying you haven't done anything about it.
No, but that's why we're investing far more in talking therapies than the government of which he was a member ever did. Yes, it takes a while to get to those therapies, but that is why we've introduced these waiting time targets, and something that no Labour government has ever done.
The person up there at the back, on the gangway, yes, you.
Nothing is going to change the fact that some people are academic and some people aren't, and more and more tests isn't going to make people brighter or more academic. Shouldn't children be allowed to be children, and maybe that would help their mental health?
What do you mean by children?
Well,
what do you mean
they
by
seem to be, more and more, they seem to be given tests and tests and tests, and they've got to meet these targets and those targets. Why not let them be children? The bright ones, the academic ones, will do it anyway. And not testing will give the teachers more time to teach.
Okay, there are a lot of people with their hands up now. Let's go to the very back there, and then I'll come over here. Yes.
I'm a teacher as well, and absolutely agree with a lot of what's been said. I believe one of the arguments is that, from the government, is that the 8 to 9-year-old multiplication tables test will tell teachers where their children need help. I can assure you that all the teachers I've worked with absolutely know, without putting children through additional testing, where they need help. The problem is getting that help.
Okay. And you also there. Yes. Yes, you.
What I would like to say is that all children are individuals. They're all different. They develop at different rates. They learn in different ways. And the idea that you're supposed to get them to meet certain targets is going to put a lot of pressure on them at a very young age, which is not fair on the children to learn at such a young age the pressures of trying to fit themselves into a certain box.
All right, and I'll take one more point. You there. Yes.
Yeah, my point was really to do with the South West. The recent Social Mobility Commission report showed that West Somerset was one of the least socially mobile areas in the country, and part of that's the education. What's the government going to do about that in terms of the rural schools?
Do you want to answer that? And then we must move on.
I believe that in terms of social mobility, a good education is absolutely crucial. That's why we've been focusing on exam standards. That's also why we want to revolutionise technical education with the introduction of T-levels, and also, as I've said, give many more young people access to apprenticeships to give them the skills they need to get the jobs they want.
Okay.
In rural areas, and why is that? And what's going to be done about it? What about, what resources are going to go into it to change that?
Well, the apprenticeship level will put, far greater funds into skills training than ever before.
It's just not. Look, in the South West, FE budgets are being cut. Money is not rising in schools. Children's centres are being shut down. She's not. I'm afraid she's just got it wrong. It's not happening on the ground. It just isn't.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, I agree.
You agree. All right. We'll move on. We go to a question because of where we're sitting. It was likely to come up, and I'm sure some of you are directly involved in it. But let's have the question from Christopher Parker, please.
Hello, yeah. Can we afford to further erode the armed forces? For instance, potential cuts to the helicopter fleet that is produced and operated within Yeovil.
Just tell us about what's operated in Yeovil or in Yeovil.
Well, for instance, here at the base we've got the Merlin and the new Wildcat. That are both produced at the Leonardo's factory in Yeovil. And
are threatened with cuts?
The force that I am on, the Wildcat, there's been rumours of the Wildcat fleet being halved to fill, to cover the cost of the amphibious fleets, etc.
Camilla Cavendish.
So I guess the Conservative government did raise the armed services budget to 2% of GDP, which I thought was really important. And it gave a really important signal to NATO that we are in there and we are behind them and we're fulfilling our global responsibilities. And I think it's really particularly important as we move towards leaving the EU that we continue to play that card, because it's one of our strongest suits, actually, with some of our EU partners and also with the United States. And as I understand, the government is committed to that, to keep that target. Clearly, because the pound has fallen in value so much because of Brexit compared to the dollar, there is a real issue now about the purchase of equipment that the armed services are supposed to be making and the pressures on the budget. And I don't know the detail of that, but I mean, there is definitely going to be some questions about that.
But wasn't the budget cut between 2010 and 2015 by about nearly 20%, the defence budget?
I don't know how much. There were some cuts made, but in 2015, obviously, the government committed to 2% of GDP.
And you're happy with that?
Yeah, well, I thought that was a really important signal. But I think the question now is, how are they going to respond to those cost pressures that are coming really from the pound against the dollar? And I suppose the one thing I would say is that we need to make sure that we're not going to have a defence review by stealth. We need to be told the facts, and we need to know exactly what's going to happen. And I think there's been a lot of confusion and obfuscation about this from various quarters, and we need the Defence Secretary to make it very, very clear what his commitment is going to be.
Christopher Parker, do you think that the defence is being badly handled at the moment? Is that your...
yeah, certainly I see that, and the threat that we keep hearing. For instance, the Albion and the Bulwark getting ditched, which is eroding further the amphibious assault capability of the Navy. We need to plug it somewhere, I understand, and money just doesn't go on trees. So, and also the Marines, potential cuts to the Marines as well. We can't just scrap these historic units as well.
Pfizer, what do you think?
So when I think about issues of the military, me personally, I would prefer if we weren't involved, obviously, in more wars. But the thing is, we obviously need the military. The big thing is about jobs. So the problem is when they make these cuts, they don't plan ahead. They don't think about what this means for people's security. So if they can take those skills and use it in other sectors, then that's the way in which we need to do it. So we often know these things are coming up. And we just let it come to that point where there's a crisis and people are worried about their jobs. And small towns where those are, quite a big share of the jobs, then that has massive implications for those communities. So what I would say is if over time we want to make cuts to the military budget and we want to shift our economy into working on other sectors, then we have to do that with jobs in mind, and we have to do that slowly. But we just don't see those plans there, and it's very frustrating for people that are in those sectors.
David Lemon.
Well, look, our armed services do a very important job, and it's not just in moments of war, peacekeeping all over the world, patrolling the seas against pirates, drugs, all sorts of issues that British armed services are involved in, and that's got to be funded. I want to put my hands firmly on the table. I am opposed to Trident. I have been committed to want our country to lead on nuclear disarmament for many, many years. And if we could at least cooperate with some others, particularly on nuclear weapons, then we might have more money to spend on the important armed services that we need.
You were nodding, Christopher, about this. You agree with that?
Which is probably contrary to a lot of people I work with. Being a Yorkshireman, I understand that we're never going to use Trident. Well, I hope we never use it. I would never push the button. I hope no one else would. Let's plug the gap with the money from Trident.
Right,
I
Teresa
don't understand why we'd use it.
Well,
then we should save on Trident and build helicopters.
Well, not just that, but
not just that. No, all right. Yep.
Yeah.
We have the best armed services in the world, and they need to be funded. And the government's committed to the NATO obligation of spending 2% on defence spending. Whilst I can't answer your question on those individual projects, I think we're all well aware that there's a very, very lively debate within government and within Parliament on this issue. And I'm absolutely confident that the government is going to continue to fund the armed services in the way they have to be. It is a crucial part of our commitment to defending this country. Unlike the Labour Party, who have a leader who thinks it might be a good idea to disband the armed forces, we totally support them.
Very cheap, isn't it, really?
But that is what Jeremy Corbyn has said in the past. And I think that it is important that we fund our armed services properly.
Richard Walker.
This spending review has been going on for a very long time now, and I think Pfizer made a really good point. It's the uncertainty for the servicemen and women and the families involved. So whatever the government decides to do, I think they need to decide quickly and be clear. For me, being in this amazing building and seeing our heritage, we have some of the best armed forces in the world, and we need to keep investing in that. And I think it would be a travesty if Whitehall were to cut away at our frontline services.
Okay, the man up there on the right, yes.
Hi, I'm a veteran of two armies. I'm a veteran of the British Army and the American Army, and I'm absolutely disgusted at successive governments, both Labour and the Conservatives, and their cuts to the defence budget. I agree that with the lady on the end there, that there is... We're changing. The world is changing. There is no need for a massive standing army anymore. However, I can't understand why we're going to spend so much money on Trident when the threats seem to be coming from smaller, terrorist groups, independent countries, things like that. Why is that?
OK. And you, sir, in the middle at the back there. Yes.
As an ex-serving member of the armed services, I also agree that we should not invest in Trident. We can test the relationship we have with the United States, and an attack on one in NATO is an attack on all. So let's just not put the money into Trident, and let's just let our big brother help us out if we need that.
And you, sir, in the centre here.
Yeah, we talk about funding the armed services. Why is it that when Putin sails by, we can only send out a minesweeper?
OK. And you want to come in? Yes.
I think it's very disingenuous to talk about percentage of GDP when you're just about to crater the economy through Brexit, and that percentage is going to be a much smaller number.
All right. OK. Well, we didn't do Brexit tonight. We do Brexit most weeks. We didn't do Brexit tonight. We're coming to the end. Shame. We're just occasionally, even though all the ministers are out there talking, we have to take a break from it. Let's just have a last quick question from you. Robert Thompson.
Are politicians incapable of answering questions? Was it just my imagination?
You've had quite a good display tonight. Let's go round. You start on it, Faz.
Yeah, I get frustrated as well with that. And I have to say, one thing that they are also very good at is forgetting the history. And I think one of the things I've heard today, hearing teachers and military people, is the big cuts that we've had in the last 7-8 years that are affecting all people working in public services. And the way that Theresa and Camilla even went on tonight is as if those things didn't happen. Those people in the city, bankers in the city, have got it as good as they've ever had it. And yet we are still suffering the impacts of the financial crisis 10 years on.
All right.
And we cannot let them forget that.
Yeah, OK. It wasn't quite the question. You've taken up most of the time we've got left. Very briefly.
Politicians, of course, are experts at not answering the question. And as a businessman, I would say this, but more straight talking is what is required.
Camilla? Quickly, if you would.
Oh, I just, if you're going to attack me, I'm going to have to slightly defend myself. I don't think at any point in this programme I've suggested that there haven't been any cuts. Local government is suffering enormously. There have been enormous numbers of cuts the coalition had to make.
Sorry, the question is, are politicians incapable of answering?
No, I'm just sorry. If you're going to, you know...
All right.
But sorry, politicians, really great politicians, do answer the question, and they diffuse it with humour and they get to the heart of it. And there are a few great politicians, and maybe one of them sitting next to me. I don't know, David.
Maybe both of them sitting next to me. It had to be very, very quick. Theresa?
No, and we are capable of answering questions.
All right, David?
We don't answer enough questions honestly. That's the truth, across the board.
OK. OK, more questions next week, then, because time's up here. Uttoxeter next week. Chairman of the Conservative Party, Brandon Lewis. Boss of Siemens is going to be on the programme. John Prescott for Labour. Week after that, Blackpool with Ken Clarke, Diane Abbott and Nigel Farage. That's an end of the Pier show for you in Blackpool. Call it on the BBC iPlayer. But my thanks to our panel and to all of you who came to this wonderful location tonight. Until next Thursday, from Yeovil or Yeovilton, depending how you like to look at it. From Question Time, good night.